Welcome everyone to our town hall discussion on the infamous and now brand new GSA Polaris GWAC. We have our partner and guest with us, Sai Alba from Polaris, and I also have ProposalHelper's Vice President of Delivery Services, Dr. Troy Tyre, with us for the discussion. We request that all all participants submit your questions in the Q&A box. Please do not raise your hand. We don't plan to unmute any of the participants. So please submit your questions in the Q&A box. We will get to those questions throughout the presentation and at the end as well. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Reena Bhatia. I will be today's moderator. I am the CEO of ProposalHelper and BidExecs. Obviously, ProposalHelper has been around for now over 10 years. I've been in the industry for more than 25 years. And as a company and as an individual, I supported multiple IDIQ, GWAC, and single award contracts. I'm excited to be the moderator today. I am going to bring our keynote speaker on, Sai Alba from Polaris. Sai, if you can unmute and say a few words about yourself, your background, and then about Polaris, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Reena. Happy to be here again with you guys. My name is Sai Alba. I'm a partner at the law firm Polaris. I've been doing government contracts law for all types of companies, focusing a lot on small to mid-sized firms in the federal marketplace for, I don't know how long now, 16 years, 17 years, I don't know. Time keeps passing. But I've been doing it for a while. And one of the key things we focus on is really some of these major procurements and best-in-class vehicles, which are becoming more and more important. And the firm generally has a core practice with government contractors dealing with a lot of M&A work, employment law, some of the IP issues that come up, everything dealing with government contractors. And that's some of our core practice. So happy to be here and answer any questions people have.
Thank you, Sai. Let me quickly bring on Dr. Troy Tyre. Troy, if you can say a few things about yourself before we get started into the details of this webinar.
Thanks, Reena. Yeah, I'm Dr. Troy Tyre. As Reena mentioned, I am the Vice President of U.S. Operations and Delivery Solutions at ProposalHelper and BidExecs. I have a day or two experience in business development and proposals, worked on many major IDIQs, as well as worked with the military and the government and collaborative research between the Department of Defense and major universities. So with that, Reena, I'll go back to you and we can start with the specific requirements.
Sounds good. Let me just do some disclaimers here so that everybody knows that this webinar, our town hall discussion, is for informational purposes only. This is not to be constituted as legal opinions or legal advice from any of the speakers on this call today. We will be recording this webinar and we will notify all participants where to find links. We generally post them on our many media channels that we have. We have our previous webinar recordings there as well. And my marketing department made sure I say this. Please follow us on LinkedIn because they post new IDIQ opportunities there every Friday. So with that, let's get down to the discussion. Our topics for today related to GSA Polaris. This is the rough agenda. We may sort of veer off of this, but these are the topics we plan to cover today. And your questions are going to drive the discussion. So please make sure you submit your questions, get those questions answered by our expert team here. The Q&A line is open throughout the discussion. So let's get started. Troy and Sai, well, let's go with Troy first. Over to you.
All right, Reena, thanks. First off, before we start, the disclaimer or the caveat is that this is all based off the draft solicitation. There is no final solicitation out at this point, but this is for the GSA Polaris GWAC. For the master contract level, the parent agency is going to be obviously GSA. Any federal agency can place a task order underneath the contract vehicle as long as it relates to IT services or IT services support. This is a small business set aside. It's kind of the replacement for the Alliant to small business. They highlight 3 set-aside categories or pools. The first one being small business, the second one being hub zone, and the third being woman-owned small business. They state in the draft solicitation that you will have a place in one of their attachments or templates to put a check mark or something for whatever pool you're going to go after. You only submit one proposal on this one, but you may receive a contract for different pools. This is a multi-award IDIQ. It's a contract vehicle. So at the contract vehicle stage, they're going to have multiple awardees. And then at the task order level, you're going to be determining what the specific contract types are. You may see different types, firm fixed price, cost reimbursement, incentive, time material, labor hour. But that's all going to be determined based on the task order requirements. Probably a key takeaway there is cost reimbursement, because this one is going to have a scorecard and you will get additional points for having an adequate accounting system. They have not released the draft scorecard yet, so that probably answers about 100 of the questions that just popped in your inbox, Rena. They have not released the draft scorecard yet. However, in the draft RFP towards the back end of that document, they do have a draft evaluation table that kind of gives you an idea of what contracts you might want to choose to get yourself the most points. It gives no point values, but it does give you at least a draft estimate of how they're going to give you additional points. All right, the lead NAC on this, and I say lead NAC because as long as your NAC relates to IT services, that NAC will be found acceptable. But the lead NAC is 541512. The period of performance on this one is a base year of 5, or base period of 5 years and an option period of 5 years. You may receive a task order the last day of the option period, and that task order may be good for 5 years. So in essence, it's got a 15-year possible pop. The place of performance is going to be determined at task order level. This can be CONUS or OCONUS. Again, kind of key to highlight that because you can get additional points for OCONUS work based on the draft evaluation table. This is a new requirement. It's a new contract vehicle going to be replacing the Alliant 2 small business. Opportunity value for this one, there is no ceiling or none identified in the draft RFP. And the minimum guarantee is $2,500. Those that are listening in that are familiar with these type of IDIQs are aware that a contract access fee or a CAF fee is normally applied. GSA is no different. This is not important when you're submitting for award on Polaris. However, it's very important for your accounting people and your pricing people to understand when they start pricing and running task orders underneath the master contract. There is no facility clearance requirement for award on the master contract. However, you may see task orders come out underneath the master contract that does require specific facility clearances, and there is a place in their draft evaluation table to where you can get additional points based on whatever the level of your facility clearance is. The proposal validity for this one after you hit submit on your proposal is 1 year or 365 days. So Rena, I don't know if you want to stop for a second and see if you have any questions come in on the overview of Polaris, or if you want to move forward.
Yeah, give me, so I do want to clarify based on early questions that have come in, but for those of you who joined us for our webinar with Keith Nakasone and Carlton Shufflebarger from GSA on Polaris, we did one early December. They did mention that they are mirroring or plan to mirror, which we do see symbols of it, or signs of it mirror this procurement to stars 3. So if you are looking for early point values, look at stars 3. But again, that's just, there's no guarantee to that, but something that they mentioned during their webinar. The other,
Yeah, Rena. No, let me jump in real quick. I agree 100%. This looks a lot like stars 3. The major difference is the insertion or infusion of a scorecard into the program.
right, and the other question that I do want to address, because we had multiple questions that had come in on this, of why did they open this up to small businesses? It was supposed to be for HubZone and women-owned companies. Well, we are not the government. You are not attending a government town hall discussion. So I just want to clarify that we don't have any decision-making authorities here, nor are we related to GSA. This is what we are just explaining, what has been released. We did pose this question to the government during our early webinar, and what they mentioned is that while GSA originally started out by planning to set this thing aside for HubZone and women-owned, considering the pool of requirements that the agencies have, they did not think it was sufficient, and so they decided to open it up to small businesses as well. Yes, there is VETS 2 for the veteran-owned companies. There is stars 3, stars 2, stars 3 for the 8A companies. So there's not a separate pool for those companies. You all fall under small business, but there is a separate pool for HubZone and women-owned.
All right, thanks, Rena.
Can I jump in on a couple of these questions just to quickly answer something, though, that I think might cause confusion as we go forward?
Absolutely.
Is that if you're 8A, there's people asking about 8A. 8A is irrelevant in this. So if you are 8A or you graduate or whatever happens to you, that's a stars 3 issue. And I think the issue is they're looking to funnel best-in-class stuff into only one vehicle, ideally, for each thing that everyone's trying to buy. So for IT services, VETS 2 is for service-able vets. This is going to be for women-owned and HubZone and potentially small business, although that is across the board in everything. And stars 3 is for 8A. So to the extent that it doesn't in here, it's only woman-owned, HubZone, and small business status that is relevant at all. So don't get confused or think about 8A or anything like that in this scenario.
I do want to clarify one thing, is that what was mentioned during our, again, I keep talking about our previous webinar that happened in December on this topic, that at task order level, there will be set-asides for just HubZone or just women-owned, combination thereof, but no set-asides just for 8A, just for SDVOSB. So that's what I'm echoing what Sai said. Do not dwell on your 8A status or any other than these 3 mentioned here.
And I'm sorry, but another thing too, I'm sure questions are going to come up about jumping, or what if you sell or you recertify and now you're woman-owned, or what if you become woman-owned and you were only small business before. These are separate contracts according to the draft RFP. So because they're separate contracts, it makes it much more difficult to jump in between. So just realize that as well. Once you're in one, you have one contract, let's say you're HubZone, and you want to have woman-owned because you changed ownership or something, you have to wait till an on-ramp, at least the way it's currently drafted.
All right, let's get into the proposal and scope requirements.
All right, thanks for clearing that up, Sai. This Polaris opportunity is geared heavily on your previous experience with different work in the IT services. I use that carefully because past performance on this one is completely different than what we're going to call the REPs, which are relevant experience projects. They give us 2 main categories of REPs that we can submit to this one. There's different point values that are going to be assigned to each one's, different point values assigned to covering more areas underneath one, different point values assigned to values on the contracts that we use to quantify the reps that we're talking to. But the 2 main categories are the performance areas, which they're calling the primary task, and the second category is emerging technologies. So if you've got contracts for, let's start with emerging technologies. They give us 6 categories. They say that we're allowed up to 6 reps to relate those to the emerging technologies. At the current way it's written, and this may change when it comes out in final, it does not state that we have to submit 1 per each category, or that we can only submit 1 per each category. So if you've got a lot of AI support, you may get to submit more than 1 rep for AI. You just won't get the points for covering more than 1 emerging technology area. We've got 6 that we can submit to emerging technologies. We've got 7 that we can submit to the primary task areas, which are the performance tasks. Those are your IT service, high-level type of tasks, cloud services, cybersecurity, data management, information communications, and some key things on these reps. There's specific requirements for the reps or for the contracts that you're going to use to justify your relevant experience project. And this kind of goes over both of them. The dollar values or the required value is different between emerging technologies and performance areas, but the period of performance on them or their recency remains the same. Your rep, if it's completed, must have been completed within 5 years. If it is ongoing, it must have 1 year of performance on the contract. That is carried over through both of the different categories. The primary rep or the performance areas that you're looking at there must have a contract value of 1 million or more if it's a completed contract. If it's an ongoing contract, then that would be based on the total estimated contract value, but it still must be 1 million or more. For the emerging technologies, that value goes down to 150K. It still has the same requirements as far as if it's completed, it must have been done within 5 years. If it's ongoing, 1 year of performance. Obviously, this is a draft RFP. Those requirements, those dollar values may change when the final comes out. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't give you any guidance on that. Something to remember with each one of these reps, every contract we use to justify a relevant experience project must be validated. They give us many ways. I'm only going to touch on a couple here, but they give us many ways that we can do that. The preferred method would be the FPDS report. If that report quantifies everything that we're claiming on the scorecard when it comes out. If it does not quantify everything we're claiming, then they give us an option to submit a contract award page as well as the statement of work or PWS. For the emerging technologies, they also got a little more lenient because a lot of times your emerging technologies do not show up clearly in a statement of work or a PWS and probably will not show up at all on an FPDS report. They state that once we fill out their template, that has not been published yet, but once we fill out their template for the rep on emerging technologies, we can take that to the contracting officer or the contracting officer's rep and have them sign the template. So those are just some of the ways that we can validate those, but all of those will need to be validated and verified for them to give us the points on those. Sai, anything to add on the categories or the reps?
Just on that last point, just so everyone knows, the case law is very bad for contractors. If the government fails to get back to you or they ignore your request or you fill out this form and you give it to them and they don't answer, it's up to you to get that from them. And if they don't give it to you and you submit it and try to say, well, they wouldn't get back to me. There's been plenty of cases. I had a federal circuit case that I was sitting in on that went the same time as the case I was working on, where the judges of the federal circuit basically said, what did you try to do? And that's just tough. You should have switched and used a different project. So if it's your only project that has emerging technology or something critical, you got to ride them, and it's up to you and only you. Unfortunately, the law, again, is bad.
All right. These next 2 slides are not really relevant to your submission of a proposal, but they're important for you to understand that these are things that are going to be required once you receive an award and a notice to proceed on Polaris. You will be required to have a Polaris program manager. No resumes required, no write-up required, no place to put that in the proposal for Polaris. But within 30 days after a notice to proceed, you will be required to give them name and all the information for the program manager. You'll be required to have a Contractor Polaris GWAC website as well as an email. Anytime you get a task order underneath the master contract, you'll be required within 3 business days to annotate that and let the GSA know that you received that award. And obviously any transactional information that you might have related to the task orders as you go through the process, invoices, submission requirements. And on the next slide, it's going to tell you that you've got to, they may have master contract level data calls. You'll have 3 business days to give them an answer to whatever data calls they send out. Monthly, you'll be required to do a subcontractor report. Although during the submission of this proposal, we've got 7 pages to develop and give them a cybersecurity supply chain risk management or Scrum assessment. Annually, you'll be required to give them a complete Scrum plan. And then obviously any task order closeout or any master contract closeouts you have in the master contract. Not extremely important when you're putting together a proposal or going after your award on Polaris, but very important for you and your company to understand that these will be requirements if you receive an award.
And I don't see these to be anything onerous or different than companies. If you have a GSA schedule, if you have another IDIQ, these are very similar. So it should not alarm anyone. Obviously the supply chain risk management is a newer addition. It's not brand new, it's newer. We saw that on STARS 3. We're seeing that snippets of that on CIOS before and now showing up here. We expect this to continue on every contract. So contractors should be prepared for this.
Thanks, Rena. The construct of the proposal for Polaris is 6 volumes. Volume 1 is a general volume that's going to have your SF forms for the original solicitation that comes out and any amendments. This is where you are going to submit your self-scoring worksheet. This is where if you're teaming some type of contractor teaming arrangement, some type of CTA, this is where you will present those documents. It's also where you're going to have a document required for professional employee compensation plan, uncompensated overtime policy, and the specific reps and certs that will be required based on your teaming construct. The relevant experience, we talked to that a little bit. For the primary, you're allowed to submit 7. For the emerging technologies, you're allowed to submit 6. This is where you would give them those contracts or FPDSs or whatever verification you have for those reps. Volume 3 is the past performance. That is a selection of 3 of the contracts that you used in Volume 2 to be used as your past performance evaluation from the government or from GSA. Their rating level there is satisfactory or better, and it must be one of the 3, as it's written now in the draft, it must be one of the 3 that are used for Volume 2 in the reps. Volume 4 is where you give them verification for systems, certifications, and clearances that you have claimed on your self-scoring worksheet. These can be a acceptable accounting system, an approved purchasing system, CMMI certifications, ISO certifications. It's also, if you've got a facility clearance, this is where you're going to give them proof that you have one, and proof of what level that you have. You get additional points for a top secret facility clearance, for example. You get more points for than you will for a secret facility clearance. Risk and assessment, that's kind of geared, and Sai, you might need to correct me on this one. That's kind of geared to give the government more confidence in your teaming arrangement. For an example, if you're going after Polaris as a JV, they want to know that you've worked as a JV before and it's not a new construct. So they're asking for copies of orders where you have been a JV before to give them that higher level of confidence. Volume 6 is responsibility. That is the cybersecurity and supply chain risk management assessment that you do. You've got 7 pages to tell them about that. So you would tell them how you manage those processes, how you ensure cybersecurity, probably that you are aware of CMMC, and that you're willing to get CMMC certified when that becomes finalized. It's also where you're going to give them specific financial resource documents so they know that your company is solvent. You'll get a GSA Form 527. That'll be submitted, as well as some other financial information that's required. So that is the high-level construct of the GSA Polaris proposal.
Yeah, and for volume 5, I know people have been concerned that there's been talk that they're going to restrict in all kinds of ways, CISP 4 and here, that they're going to restrict people to only bidding if you can show you've worked together in the past. This is sort of a soft requirement in that regard, where they're saying you're going to get additional points. You're not going to be dinged if you're a new JV, but you're going to get additional points if you were in the same business relationship, which in my reading here, it's not entirely clear, but my reading is that that means you've been in the JV together as like this specific group of companies, or with your subcontractors, that you've been a prime with these people as subcontractors in the same bidding strategy used for the Polaris bid is the way it's structured. So you're not going to get hit, but you're going to get additional points if you can show that. And so I just want people to be aware of that. That's something that I think will cause confusion.
Great point, Si. Thank you.
So,
Rena, either questions or next slide?
yeah, before we move on, since there are multiple questions surrounding this, we might as well answer. First of all, there's a question on, is CMMC required for this? There is no CMMC certification yet. So there is no CMMC certification required. What they're asking for is a small component of what will eventually become part of CMMC is your supply chain risk management. So please do not dwell on that CMMC certification. It does not exist unless Si or Troy, you tell me otherwise, that I was not aware of.
No, ma'am, it does not exist. It's not on their draft evaluation table. It will not be on their scorecard. It's not mature enough. But what people need to understand is you do need to mention that when you're drafting a cybersecurity and Scrum assessment, to let them know you're aware of it and you're willing to be certified in it.
Right, and then the multiple questions that have come up is related to REPs. Can you use subcontractors' past performance for REPs, or can it come only from a prime?
Yeah, that one is kind of iffy in the draft, Rena. I would say as it sits right now, it says that you can. But something else I failed to mention is you can only use a rep one time. There's a caveat to that, though. You can use it one time in each category. So you can only use that contract to justify a relevant experience in the performance areas or the prime task areas one time. You may use that same contract to claim an emerging technology, but you can't use it more than once in emerging technologies. So that's a constraint. Si, unless you read something different, I think as of right now, you can use subcontractors' experience, but that may change when the final comes out.
Yeah, I think the only caveat is that the way I see this language, again, in this draft, is that if you're in a joint venture, you can use everybody. If you're prime sub, you can only use small businesses that qualify under the primary NAICS code here. So if you have a large business subcontractor, as it's written right now, you can't use their past performance and all of that.
All right, we're going to go into the unique characteristics of this draft. And Sai, this is one area that people are chomping on the bits to hear all about the teaming, all kinds of fun stuff that you're going to bring to the table. So go for it.
Sure. So the period of performance is actually a 5+5. It's not a 1-year base. It's 5+5. And to be able to continue on, you have to have at least $500,000 of work in that first five years. Also, there has been some talk about they could make it a requirement at the option year to have CMMC level 1 is what a lot of these contracts are moving towards. So that's why they want to see your commitment to getting CMMC when it exists. I know there's been a lot of talk, a lot of push, but everybody's right on this call, this webinar. It does not exist yet. As far as the type of awards, again, it's going to be small business, hubs-owned, woman-owned. There may be additional pools added at some point, but not right now. So I guess keep an eye on the on-ramps and things like that. There are no guaranteed on-ramps. It can just happen if the government decides that they need it, or if people off-ramp for one reason or another. But what's good is that from an off-ramp perspective, there isn't anything in here that creates a sort of automatic off-ramp for people. It's more the government has the right to do it. And if you're not doing things or you're failing on performance, they can terminate you for default, not just off-ramp you. So be aware of that. And if you fail to recertify as small at that 5-year mark, then they could push you off as well. So you just need to also be aware of that. And under the new SBA rules, if you're acquired, you cannot bid on new task orders. So that's another thing that has created issues in the M&A market and environment. So that's something to be aware of. You can't win this contract and then go to market where a large business buys you and you recertify as large thinking, well, I got a 5-year period of performance. Under the old rule, I could bid on all the task orders. So even this large business could buy me and bid on all the task orders. That is no longer the case. So you basically, the vehicle becomes worthless, essentially. The other interesting thing, I think, before you get on, other thing is pricing is almost not relevant here. You do have to put a professional development plan in place, so they're going to check and make sure that your plan for professional compensation is appropriate and you're not completely lowballing everything. And because there is that professional development plan requirement, it also means that you cannot buy into this. So there isn't like pricing, like a sample task order or something, at least not yet. But because you have to put in that professional compensation plan, they will check and see if it's within the ballpark, if it's reasonable. If it's not realistic and they think you're lowballing, you can lose the award because of that, which is a little different than like your standard IDIQ or firm fixed price work. Even though it might not have a price realism analysis clearly in the RFP because there isn't pricing, that professional development plan brings that requirement into play. So just know that you can't really lowball. It also, frankly, opens it up to protests if people think that competitors are lowballing. When it comes to the open season, again, they will likely have them, but it isn't something that's guaranteed. It's going to be at agency discretion. It may only be open season for the hub zone pool or open season for the woman-owned pool. And they might never do an open season for small business. It really depends. You can have more than one Polaris contract, but only if they're in different pools as well. So, and my interpretation of this, the way it's written in the contract right now, I interpret that as being the actual prime contractor cannot hold two. So there's nothing clearly in here that says you can't have a prime and be in a JV. I know that was a big thing with STARS 3. But the issue with STARS 3 is SBA had a say in that. They were approving them because it was 8A. They don't even do that anymore, but under the old rule, they were approving those. And so now, though, SBA is not even involved in this. And unless the RFP restricts it, the actual company in privity of contract with the government, if you're in a JV, is the JV, not the members. Same thing, if you're a prime, it's just the prime. So you can be a sub on a different team. You can be in a JV. You can bid by yourself. So in theory, you could submit, if you want to call it, multiple proposals, even under the same pool, so long as you're not a prime or the JV is not doing it twice or something like that. And also you can submit under each pool one time as yourself or as your joint venture. There's no limit on new contracts that can come up through the open seasons, and it's basically going to be the same terms, but note that if you come in through an open season, the period of performance is going to be the exact same as the prime contract, the main contract. So after that first 5 years, you get another 5 years. It's just because you come in with an open season in year 3 of the option, you're not going to get any additional time. When it comes to off-ramping, again, if you don't receive the certain number of task orders, the 500,000 in that first 5-year period, you can be off-ramped. If you don't recertify as small at the 5-year mark, then you will not get the option period. So it's not like an automatic off-ramp. If you win this and you're acquired in year 3 of the base period, and you recertify as large, they're not going to off-ramp you, but you're not going to be eligible for the option. And because of the SBA rule, though, it's important that you won't be able to bid on new task orders, not because of this RFP, though, just because of the new rules. So that's open seasons and off-ramping.
So, before we dive into, well, let's dive into the teaming discussions. There's a bunch of questions around that, so I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so when it comes to, I know this is always a hot topic. Again, this is GSA. They use the term CTA. However, in the RFP, they're pretty clear that CTA, they're using the FAR definition. They don't cite to FAR 9601, but they say a CTA is X or Y. It's a joint venture or it's a prime sub relationship. They are not talking about GSA CTAs. And I hate that they keep using this term. Again, a CTA in the GSA context is made up. It doesn't exist in law or regulation. It's a construct of GSA. They've caused a ton of confusion by using it. They should come up with a different name for it and frankly write regulations, but they haven't. So when you're talking about what you're doing here in this RFP for Polaris, it's either a JV or a prime sub. Okay, as I noted, you can, I think, submit a bid under the current RFP as a prime and as part of a JV for the same pool. I think it's clear that you can also submit a proposal as a prime for small business, another proposal as a prime for HubZone, another proposal as a prime for woman-owned, because they're different contracts that you're proposing on. Same thing with your JV. If your JV qualifies for all 3, you can submit a proposal on all 3. What you can't do is have the same prime or the same JV submit twice for one pool. If you're submitting as a JV, there's a host of things that you're going to have to provide, and you're going to have to provide information for the JV for all members of that JV. And I think it's also important to note that when you go down to, volume, the pricing volume, and the volume where you're talking about responsibility and risk assessment and the certifications, you're submitting things for all members of the joint venture individually, but it's all going to be counted. There's a section in the RFP that talks about a populated joint venture, and if you're talking about a populated joint venture, then you submit the responsibility information for the JV itself. However, SBA does not allow populated joint ventures to qualify for the exemption from affiliation. So although the RFP allows it, if you bid as a populated joint venture with, say, 3 other small businesses and you're all small, you will be affiliated because you violated the SBA's rule by creating a populated joint venture. So the only way your JV would qualify is if all of you, when aggregated, are still small under the the 541, 512 NAICS code that applies to this whole thing. If you're not, when aggregated, you will not be eligible. And if you get size protested, you will lose. And frankly, it's also a False Claim Act violation. So there is no populated joint venture for all intents and purposes. I would follow the SBA rules and follow it carefully to make sure that you're meeting all the various requirements here, not kind of going rogue or trying to manipulate things.
So, Sai, let me interrupt you just a second here. Did you say that FAR 9601 does apply?
Yeah, they don't cite to it, but in the joint venture section itself, they clearly say, or in the teaming section rather, they clearly say that they're talking about two things. Trying to see if I could find the exact section again. So if it's section L513, it says contractor teaming arrangements mean an arrangement which two or more companies form a partnership or joint venture. No difference. A partnership is a joint venture for all intents and purposes. Don't get confused by that. Or a potential prime contractor agrees with one or more other companies to have them act as subcontractors. So that's it. It's just those two things, a JV or prime sub. The reason it says partnership is if you technically form a joint venture that's not an LLC, you've automatically formed a general partnership, which has a whole bunch of problems with it. I wouldn't recommend that. Just form an LLC and do a standard JV through that if that's the way you're going.
And so there's a related question around that. How will GSA address the experience requirements and evaluations for JV to align with SBA JV rules? The 13 CFR 125.8E.
Yeah, so I think the way I'm reading it right now, they are aligned. So they're giving you credit for all JV members. There's nothing here that limits the credit to just small business members of a JV if you're in a mentor protege. But if you're in that same mentor protege and you're bidding as a prime sub, it doesn't, the way this is currently drafted, the subcontractor experience would not be included. And so that's a potential issue that I think might need to be addressed. But as of right now, that's the way it's written.
And
So
an experience of every JV member will count, not the JV itself. So individual JV member experiences do count. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, they haven't made this thing easy, have they?
And that's where, if you're in a prime sub, though, it's important to note that in sort of volume 4, for instance, system certification and clearances must be in the name of the prime itself. Subcontractor information will not be considered. So if you're looking at CMMI or ISO or something like that, it's got to be yours, not your subcontractors. Whereas if you're in a joint venture, then in that sense, it can be in the JV itself or the names of all the members, but really there isn't going to be much in the JV itself. So it's just all the members. And if all the JV members have certification levels, like CMMC has, 1, 2, 3, whatever. If all of them have that, only the highest level met by all of the members will be considered. So if one of your members has a level 3 and everyone else has level 1, you only qualify as level 1 for your JV. So you can't piggyback off of the highest member. They all have to, it's whatever the highest level is that all members have.
Interesting. Okay.
So when it also comes to the reps and certs section of things, it's something that has to be submitted itself. So the JV itself is submitting everything under Section K and all the members. Really, the JV probably isn't going to have that much except for your size certification, which is how, if you're in a populated JV, you could get into problems, because if you're treating yourself under the SBA rules and giving yourself the exemption from affiliation, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 small businesses all in the JV, you're certifying that the JV itself is small. and you're certifying that all the members are small. And that's where you could get into trouble if you're using a populated joint venture, because you would have to affiliate yourselves. Also, make sure that when you're doing this, you're following exactly what's in this RFP. It's pretty clear in a lot of these areas what they want you to submit and when. And so this attachment JP5, which is not in the draft, identifying the company that performed each submitted experience, right? And the role that the JV or the team had and the current size status of that member. So if you have 3 members in a JV and you're relying on the experience or past performance in whichever related section of one of the members, you need to submit this specific form that's going to be in the final RFP, identifying the member company that performed that example, their role in performing that example, and their current socioeconomic status, because they want to know, especially in the prime sub context, whether that person is still small or whether they were at the time of doing the work, and exactly what they did. So if you have a person in your JV who was in a JV before and got their experience that way, you have to say, oh, that person did it in that JV, and then talk about what they did. We don't know exactly how it's going to look until this form is released, but this makes it pretty clear that you're going to have to explain it so that the GSA can see and understand exactly what that person did, presumably to give it either discounted credit or additional credit, but it's not entirely clear what they're going to do with it.
So piggybacking on what you said earlier, Sai, that if a JV is claiming points for certifications, ISO, CMMI, what have you, it is the lowest common denominator that is going to dictate what points they claim. What if one of the JV members does not have a certification? Does the entire team then lose out? They can't claim those points?
Yeah, so the way it's written right now in volume 4 is that it's whatever the JV itself has, or all JV members. If the certification has levels, then only the highest level met by the JV itself or all members will be considered.
Okay. So if one of the members does not have the certification at all, potentially, this is a question we should ask the government, but potentially then the JV cannot claim those points.
Right, that's the way I'm reading it right now.
Okay. And can we talk a little bit about mentor-protege, especially where the mentor is a large business or one of the parties' entities is a large business? How does that work?
And that's, so when they're talking about like the reps and certs and the experience and things, and they're specifically telling you, you have to note the current size and socioeconomic status, that does worry me a little bit that they're going to look at it and maybe get confused or not understand what their own RFP says and potentially not give credit. But there's nothing in the RFP right now that would allow the government to discredit a mentor's experience or past performance. It would only be if they did it not thinking or not understanding what the text of their RFP says. So as of right now, you should be able to take full credit.
All right. Questions around, let me just get to the question here. I lost it. Give me a second. Will past performance from mentor be allowed if submitting as an MPA? You're not submitting as MPA.
Right. That's another area that there's a lot of confusion. In fact, even at DOJ in some of the cases I'm defending right now, False Claim Act cases, DOJ is confused about the difference between a JV and a mentor-protege. The mentor-protege is simply the relationship of the parties having nothing to do with any contractual relationships, bidding, work on a federal contract, all that. It's just the two parties helping each other out. When you go after work together, you can do it either as a prime sub or a joint venture. And if you choose a joint venture, you follow the joint venture rules for this procurement. If you're choosing prime sub, you follow the prime sub rules, which would be very bad if you're doing as it's currently written, because then your mentor's experience and everything they're bringing to the table would not count. under these rules as they're currently written. So if you're in a mentor protege, you want to submit as a joint venture, which then raises other questions about, well, what if you need other team members in that joint venture? If you have a joint venture with a protege and a mentor, and then you add other small businesses to it, that's going to be problematic potentially, because there's no real rule that gives the affiliation exemption to a joint venture for members who are not proteges. So I think there's risk of affiliation there. So what you'd have to do is form a JV with your mentor, and you as the protege, form a JV with your mentor, and then put all the other small businesses you want to work with as subcontractors, because then you would be able to use their experience, and you'd be both having to look at the JV rules and the subcontractor rules to make sure you're following both when you're submitting proposals and bidding the experience levels.
Okay, and Ken, there's a question here. You mentioned that you can be a prime and sub on others. So you could potentially have multiple bids, but can you use the same past performance in more than one proposal? Can that same proposal show up somewhere else?
There is no limitation.
Past performance, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there is no limitation on that. You can't submit two proposals yourself, and so then that's the limitation. But if you submit a proposal as a sub over on one team or in a JV and then yourself, there's nothing that says you can't use the same experience for both bids.
Okay. Troy, can you check on that language if there is? I know STARS 3 had that, well, no, I think it was Oasis that had that limitation where the same contract number could not show up on multiple bids or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing. So
Yeah, Raina, I looked that one up the other day, and Cy is 100% spot on. As the draft is written right now, it does not have any restriction for that. That doesn't mean it will not come out and restrict it in the final.
gotcha. Okay, coming to more questions around, oh my goodness, the CPA confusion. I think we have put that thing to bed. So, you know, it's either a JV or a prime sub. Tons of questions still surrounding. Please explain CPA. I think we have clarified it by now. There is a question that talks about organizational risk assessment, that one of the volumes. Will credit be given to JVs whose members have previously worked together as prime sub, that they were not together in a JV, but they have worked together in some other capacity?
Not the way I read it, but the way I read it is you have to be in the same, this is not credit. Like if you mean past performance credit and stuff, yes, you're going to get all that credit if you're in a JV. But if you mean the extra sort of bonus points in the risk section of volume 5, you only get the extra points if you're in the same business relationship with the same parties. So you're saying, I was a prime with these subs and we're bidding as a prime sub on Polaris, great, extra points. I was in a JV with these same people as a JV in other projects and we're bidding as a JV here, the same group, great, you get extra points. That's my reading, but Troy, I don't know if you had another comment.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I mean, you could try to stretch it and say, you know, in the previous contract, the one I'm submitting, we were a JV, now we're a prime sub. That business relationship is different. So you would be taking a risk asking for points there, or they just wouldn't give you points there. Again, not crystal clear in the draft RFP.
A good question to submit to the government. So keep that in the hip pocket to submit. Can a JV submit as small business, and can the JV lead then also submit their own prime under WOSB or some other socioeconomic category?
Yeah, I don't see any restriction on that.
Okay, so as long as you're not submitting in the same pool, being prime, you can't be prime on 2 proposals in WOSB or are on the same proposal, but you can do combinations thereof. So you can be in a JV lead and you can submit your own just as a prime.
Right. That's the way it's currently drafted.
Okay, question around pricing, the pricing at the master contract level. Can we clarify that a little bit? It says, please clarify pricing requirements at master contract level, says none, and section F.2 references contract year 1 pricing. So is pricing required, not required? How is pricing working on GSA Polaris?
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know, Troy, you want to jump in too, but I've read it as there isn't really a pricing section, but they're making you still put together the professional compensation plan, which more is about how you're going to do it, and to make sure that you're not going to lowball your professional employees, and how you're actually looking at it.
Yeah, Sai, I would agree. Based on the draft RFP, there is no pricing volume required. There is no pricing table that needs to be submitted. What you're submitting in the general volume is a general overview of how you build your employees' compensation plan. So that might be very general, might touch on the benefits that you offer, things like that. And the only thing that's really pricing related other than general stuff would be in volume 6, where they want to make sure that your company is financially solvent. So you're giving them financial documents, but it's not a pricing table. It's the ability for your company.
Okay. And multiple questions surrounding this. You cannot or can you use subcontractors' experiences for past performance and REPs?
Well, to start with, the past performance has got to come from the REP. So that question is just addressing the REP. And my read on this, and Sai may have a different read, is that's the prime's experience. It's the JV members' experience. I would have to go back in and dig to see if subcontractor experience was allowable there as well.
Okay, so we will follow up with the audience on that unless Sai, you have an answer. Can you use your subcontractor's experience on REPs?
If they're small, the way I read it is if they're small. If they're large, you couldn't.
Right, that's how I read it, that all small businesses you can, but we will do a follow-up just to make sure that we don't give incorrect information. So we have come up, we've gone over an hour now, and I know that the questions are still coming in, but I want to be respectful of your time, Sai, and Troy, your time as well. So we are going to end here. The questions are now starting to look very similar surrounding teaming, but I think we have answered most, if not all of them. This recording will be available to all the participants. So, you know, just make sure that you, if you don't get it, reach out to us. It will take about 3 days. Give us about 3 days to get this out to you all. But I do want to quickly, you know, put up a cheap marketing slide here for Proposal Helper. We are here to help you, whether you use us for your proposal services or not. Feel free to send us your questions. We believe in the teacher mentor position and leadership in the industry. Happy to answer. Sai, you've always been a great partner, and I've helped out our clients in answering some sticky questions. We always appreciate that. We highly recommend that you contact Polaris Mazza, talk to Sai. These are very important opportunities not to be taken lightly, especially when it comes to forming proper JVs. We've had companies who have come to us and said, hey, can you give us a template for a JV relationship or agreement? It's not a template. It's not something you take lightly. You do need to have proper legal counsel. So we do recommend you talk to Sai and Polaris Mazza for that. Here's the contact information for us. If you need to reach out to any of us, please feel free. And again, follow Proposal Helper on LinkedIn. We do put out some very valuable information for our audience. So thank you all for joining today. Sai, thank you so much for your time. Troy, appreciate you jumping on.
Yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
What really fast, I'm sorry, but I saw something that's kind of important, that there's confusion. So when we were talking about you can submit proposals for one bid and another, that was cross pools. So you can use the same past performance for small business and then use the same thing for HubZone and the same thing for woman-owned. What you can't do is use the same proposal or the same past performance reference, or relevant experience rather, in multiple proposals under the same pool. That is prohibited.
That's a very good clarification. Thank you for that. All right. Well, anything else, Sai? Would you like to add anything?
No, I think we're good at that point.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about this all day, obviously. So thank you again for everyone who participated. Thank you, Sai. Thank you, Troy.